Growing up in the 90s was an absolute treat. It was a time of Lansmans and lager. It was cool Britannia. It was a time when to be a British kid was cool, and around the world our music was celebrated, our culture was celebrated, and it was an innocent time before things changed in 2001 when those Twin Towers hit, and after that we seem to have been in a period of sort of decline, really, in many regards, and in music, I think, in a lot of ways too. But the 90s, that was the time when I grew up, and I wanted to do a whistle-stop tour of some of the Britpop albums that had the biggest impact on me at the time, and I think probably a whole generation of people my age will remember these fondly. So I thought today I would go through those. So, first of all, you can't mention Britpop without mentioning Suede. Suede was arguably the band that started that sound, and their debut album, self-titled Suede, came out in 1993. And then the year after that, and the years after that, the whole movement expanded out of this. You've got, obviously, Animal Nitrate is the one we all know. But yeah, Moving, Pantomime Horse, The Drowners, Metal Mickey, Animal Lover. I feel there were so many classic songs that came off this album that inspired an entire generation of music, and an entire culture just emanated from Suede and from the bands that were around in that time. But this was the first one, 1993, Suede. Next up, no conversation about Britpop would be complete without talking about the biggest rivalry, the most famous rivalry of that scene, and that is Blur versus Oasis. So where do we start? Well, Definitely Maybe, I believe, came out in 1994. Yeah, so this was a year after Suede's debut album. Just hit like a freight train and really just showed the way forward for Oasis. Rock and Roll Star, Live Forever, Supersonic, Cigarettes and Alcohol, Slide Away. I mean, just amazing tracks on here. And this iconic album cover too. Which, by the way, my mate Rob, if he's been to the location where this album cover was shot, and he's got himself lying on the floor like that, recreating the cover. It's awesome. It's his profile picture online. It's the coolest profile picture in the world. But yeah, that was my first introduction to Oasis. This debut album, when it came out in 1994, I bought my copy on cassette because it was slightly cheaper in those days, and I was like 14. So I bought the cassette, but now I have the CD, and I'm very happy to own that. And of course, followed up the year later with What's the Story, Morning Glory. You know, the one of the two biggest albums of the year. There was the big rivalry, wasn't there, between Blur's Great Escape and What's the Story, Morning Glory. So it was between the singles. I believe it was Wonderwall off this one, and Country House, I believe it was, which would get to number one, and there was a big argument, and there was quite a lot of rivalry between the bands. At the time, neither band would particularly explain why things got quite so vicious, but in subsequent interviews, it turns out, unsurprisingly, there was a girl involved, and Liam apparently had been shagging the same girl that Damon had been shagging, something like that, so the story goes. This is not from the horse's mouth, and so take anything I say with a pinch of salt, and nobody sue me for those comments. That's all speculative and allegedly and blah blah blah. But apparently that's why it got quite so entrenched, and the rivalry lasted for as long as it did, because there was some sort of love rivalry at the middle of it. But it made for a fantastic story between these two bands, and really sort of Britpop as a whole probably peaked, I would say, around about 1995 with these two albums. It was just a frenzy. Nobody could get enough of these two albums. They were both tremendous albums. I mean, I hemmed and hawed back in the day about which one I preferred. I bought both of them and loved them, and everybody sort of tries to pin you down, don't they? It's like, well, you Blur or Oasis. It's like, I don't really know, to be honest. Like, you know, I've listened to them both so many times over the years. The other day, I put up an album, a video about the albums I've listened to most in my life. What's the Story, Morning Glory was on there. I don't think I put this on there, but I easily could have done. I always, after I've done that video, I keep pulling out albums that could easily have been contenders for that one. So I might have to do a follow-up video of 10 other albums that I've listened to the most in my life, but sort of didn't fit into the first one or something. Whatever, that's by the by. But yeah, the Oasis Blair rivalry was tremendous. Of course, before the Great Escape came out, you had Park Life, which was just a brilliant album. Obviously, you know, Park Life on there, Girls and Boys, Jubilee, This Is Low, Magic of Error, the Debt Collector, Bad Head. I mean, just so many brilliant tracks off that one as well. I think this one came out in '94 also. So yeah, 1994, it was Park Life and Definitely Maybe. But those bands really, for most people, belong to 1995 with these two absolute classics. But don't overlook these two. These are also brilliant albums. Another massively influential band on the scene was, of course, Jarvis Cocker's Pulp. You had things like His and Hers and Different Class, just absolutely brilliant albums. I think at the time I probably listened to His and Hers a little bit more than I listened to Different Class, although I do remember having and loving both of them at the time. But yeah, you've got on His and Hers, you've got things like Joyriders, Babies, Do You Remember the First Time, which was a massive single of that. Have You Seen Her Lately, Acrylic Afternoons, David's Last Summer, Someone Like the Moon, lots of really good stuff on there. But I think in terms of like number of massively iconic tracks, it has to be Different Class, doesn't it? You know, you got Common People on there, Disco 2000, Sorted Out for Ease and Wiz. Yeah, I mean, just absolute bangers. So many amazing songs that came off this album, and actually all of the ones so far that just soundtrack the 90s for so many people and created that massive sort of euphoric almost feeling of bringing a young British kid in the 90s. Really felt cool. It felt like we were part of something. It almost felt like our version of the 60s, you know, the Beatles and the Rolling Stones. You know, we had Blur and Oasis and Pulp and The Verve and Suede and all these other people. It felt like we had our own thing like that. And that's special because I don't know what British kids now do listen to. I mean, I don't necessarily listen to a lot of the sort of pop music that's out in the charts these days, so perhaps there is something and I'm missing it because I'm old and crusty and like stuff that's sort of a bit old-fashioned. But I don't know, there doesn't seem to be this sort of cultural zeitgeist around British music in the same way that there was back then, and I'm very happy to be a part of it. And certainly Blur were massive for me as well. The next album, which was just absolutely everywhere, was The Verve with Urban Hymns. This was Richard Ashcroft's band, and of course Bittersweet Symphony. It was I think it got to number one. If it didn't, bloody well should have been. It's a tremendous song. It's number one on the album track listing too. And of course The Drugs Don't Work. That was another huge single off of that one. And just, you know, I mean, Catching the Butterfly, Neon Wilderness, Lucky Man, I think that might have been another single off there. That was a tremendous song as well. Come On. I mean, so many brilliant tracks from The Verve. Richard Ashcroft then went on to have a very good solo career afterwards too. Tremendous album, absolutely iconic of the 90s. It was one of those ones where like you could go around anybody's house and they'd have a copy of that. Probably all of these so far, actually. Probably all of them all the way to go through. I bet if you look around, you'll have these on a shelf somewhere. I would imagine if you were a British kid growing up in the 90s. Next one, Blue Tones, Expecting to Fly. Blue Tones, I always expected them to sort of like carry on being as amazing as this album was. I really love this album and still do. I still play it fairly regularly. But yeah, so Blue Tonic, The Fountainhead, Slight Return was obviously the massive song off this. That was the big single. But Vampire, Time and Again, Cut Some Rug. I mean, it's a really excellent album and seems to have been a little bit more forgotten these days, although at the time it was absolutely brilliant. They have brought out future albums. I need to sort of probably investigate a little bit more about what they've been up to after this one. But this one I think was 95 as well. When did this come out? Does it say on the back? No, it was 95 or 96. It was around then. I remember buying it and loving it when it came out, playing it to death, and still do listen to it now. Another absolute favourite album from the day was Supergrass, I Should Coco. Yeah, brilliant. Again, there were so many there were so many songs, like we'd sort of be like in a mate's car listening to the radio on the way to a party or something, and all singing along to like Lenny and All Right and Man-Sized Rooster and Caught by the Fuzz and Strange Ones. I mean, Christ, again, like so many iconic songs from this band, and this particular album for me was the one that I always listened to just again and again and again. And I believe this was also 1995. 94, there we go, so 94, yeah, 94 or 95. 94, I think, but anyway, yeah, regardless, it was in that same sort of sweet spot, really, I think, sort of mid-90s, that came out. Absolutely amazing album. Next up, we've got another of my all-time favourite albums, which is Ocean Colour Scene, Moseley Shoals. This, again, just such a beautiful album from start to finish. The Riverboat song is just one of my favourite songs by any band ever. The Day We Caught the Train is amazing. The Circle, Lining Your Pockets is amazing. You've Got It Bad, Getaway. I mean, just amazing. I love this band. I've got quite a lot of their albums, including this, which is brilliant as well. This is a live at the Glasgow Barrowland live CD, which is really good. If you have a chance to check that out, if you haven't done, that's tremendous. I'll put that away in a bit. It'll be turning me back on you all. But Moseley Shoals was where it all was for me. Again, when did this one come out? 1996. Absolutely brilliant album. Love that to death. Just one of my favourites of all time. Next up, we've got Cooler Shaker and K. This one, Govinda was obviously the big single off of this one, and it's hard to read the tracks because they all go around in a circle like that, but where does it start? Hey Dude, that was another big one off that. Night on the Town, Govinda, that was the huge single. Magic Theatre, Into the Deep was brilliant. Sleeping Jive, Tatva, that was amazing. That was I think that might have been a single as well. Grateful When You're Dead. Again, brilliant. Hollow Man, really good stuff. Cooler Shaker K, classic album. It's going to be 95 or 96 or 94, isn't it? Because they pretty much all are. When did this one come out? It doesn't say on the back, but it's going to be there. It's going to be in that sweet spot. Trust me, it's one of those. And finally, British bands that every teenager listened to. Of course, it's Radiohead. Perhaps not as upbeat as some of the other offerings on this list, although you could argue the Verve's Urban Hymns was particularly upbeat. But yeah, Radiohead. I mean, Pablo Honey, the Bends, OK Computer. I mean, they were just staples of any teenager's life in the 1990s. This one was 1997. I think Pablo Honey was 93. And the Bends were somewhere in the middle. So like those three, basically, they were the ones that sort of, I guess, stretched that era. Paranoid Androids, Subterranean Homesick Alien, of course, Karma Police, No Surprises, Lucky the Tourist. I mean, come on, we all know all of them. We all sing along to them. I'm sure if you are of my generation, you had this, or your mates had it, and you sung along every time it came on. They were just tremendous. I mean, there were so many brilliant albums of that time from British bands. They were loosely sort of called Britpop. It's a sort of derogatory term, I suppose, in some senses. I still sort of label them roughly that, but they're just, as you can see from the spectrum of music that's encompassed into that. It was really sort of just all of the bands that came out at that time. You had stuff coming out of the Manchester scene that that was a little bit more kind of electronica based. You had like In Spiral Carpets and the Stone Roses and James and people like that came out of the Hacienda Club that was owned by some of the people from New Order. That of course greatly inspired Oasis. I believe Noel was a roadie for In Spiral Carpets for a little bit before he came back to join the band. When he was in his sort of late teens. So they grew up listening to all that type of music. So of course that's massively influential, all this sort of stuff as well. Then you have bands like Garbage and the Cranberries and the Cardigans and Portishead, and there was so much great music that was coming out of that time, and it was a really fun time to be around and to be around music. And I'm grateful enough that all of that stuff was happening at the time when I was coming of age musically and listening to all this stuff and able to explore it for the first time. It really was a treat and a privilege. I wasn't around, I wasn't old enough to go out and buy, like, Pink Floyd albums when they were first released, or Led Zeppelin albums, or Beatles albums, or Rolling Stones albums, or any of that stuff. I've kind of rediscovered that since. Some at the time period, when I was discovering all this stuff, I was also discovering, the Doors and people like that. But the ones that were my era, the ones that were new and fresh, and it was like the latest release out, and you rushed to get it. Like when you discovered there's a new album out by Oasis, and you rushed down to the store and you bought it, and you were like one of the first people to hear it. That's such a treat, and it's such a treasured memory that I will always be very fond of. And all these years later, getting on for 30 years later in some cases, I mean, look, this is celebrating its 30th anniversary this year. A lot of them will be in the next couple of years or so, and even all this time later, I put one of these on, and it thrills me as much to listen to it as it ever did. Perhaps more so because at the time it was just really great music it was really cool and I enjoyed it, and now it's really great music that's cool and I enjoy it. But there's that lovely nostalgia that goes along with all the memories that were made along with that, the parties, the friends, the experiences, the ups and the downs of sort of young teenage life and exploring the world for the first time are bound up in these beautiful albums. So that's it. Thanks very much for watching. Please leave down in the comments below either if you are kind of similar age to me, I guess, and remember these albums, which were your favourite. Have I missed any out that I think absolutely should be on this list? Or if you were either older or younger than me, what were the bands that you were thrilled about that defined your music listening when you were coming of age into music and exploring music and enjoying it sort of for the first time and going out and buying it with your own money and listening to it on your own stereo system and all that cool stuff that is somehow a real important part in all of us music fans' personal histories. Thanks very much for watching. As always, please subscribe. I am a new channel. I'm on 24 subscribers now. My first milestone. I really want to get to that 100 subscribers. So if you could throw me a subscribe if you want to, and if you liked it, and if you liked it enough to want to see another one, that would be amazing. And if so, I look forward to seeing you in the next one. Cheers.